The Environment Minister, Edwin Poots, addressed the issue of road safety earlier, laying out his vision for reducing the number of people killed on the roads here. It seems to have set himself some pretty ambitious targets. He's here to tell us more. Thanks for joining us. You want a new sort of 10-year strategy. What do you think you need to focus on here?
Well, the key areas, I suppose, are young people, drink driving, everybody wearing their seatbelts. So they're not particularly new issues. It's about ensuring that they're actually pursued and followed through. So we have set ourselves some fairly stiff targets to meet over the next number of years. We have brought this road strategy forward by 2 years because we've completed all of the targets that were set previously by the 2002 strategy. And as a consequence of that, we estimate that £961 million has been saved. But leaving that to the one side, we've saved the lives of hundreds of people by implementing that strategy. We need to do better, and we want to drive the numbers of people who are getting killed and seriously injured on a road down by around 55% over the next 10 years.
What would be some of the changes that you might envisage that would bring those numbers down?
Well, there's a whole series of things, and obviously I think that the improvements that are taking place in our road infrastructure will help, but the bottom line is that road deaths are caused by errant driving. So we need to ensure that people pay more attention at junctions for motorbikes, for example, and for cyclists. We need to ensure that people drive at speeds, particularly on our rural roads, which are appropriate, that they aren't taking corners at excessive speeds and then finding when they get round that corner that there's something else happens to be there. And 72% of the road deaths take place on rural roads, so there is going to be a greater concentration of police activity on our rural roads. So
just on that, because there's always this debate as to whether it's about information or whether it's about policing and enforcement of the law. Do you think enforcement has a bigger role to play than hitherto?
I think there's an element of both. There's an educative process that needs to take place, but for those people who won't allow themselves to be educated and want to defy all of the rules that are in place, then enforcement is a key player. And if people don't want to follow the rules, then they leave themselves subject to such enforcement. And I welcome the fact that the police are going to raise their concentration upon rural roads. Most of the deaths that have taken place in Northern Ireland have been in the south and the west of the province. So it would be useful to actually challenge what is going on in those areas. And that is going to be something that's in the wider interest of the community in those areas, not in the interest of the individuals who are actually committing the offences.
You mentioned younger drivers there in particular. You seem to be considering all sorts of new possible restrictions on younger drivers, be it in terms of the kind of passengers they can carry, the hours they can drive, or indeed also you talk about having to keep to an offence-free period, which means a period without having any penalty points against you after you passed a test.
Well, all of these things are subject to consultation, and nothing will be done without properly consulting with the community and finding what they have to say about all of this. Some of the measures are quite radical. The nighttime curfew would be one of those which is very radical. I suspect there'll be those who support it and those who will be against it. I should clarify that that doesn't mean that as soon as it's dark, people aren't allowed out onto roads. That nighttime curfew may kick in the early hours of the morning or fairly late on in the evening. It shouldn't be something that affects young people who work at nights, but it may affect...
How would you work that though? Would somebody have to apply for a special dispensation or something?
It may be on occasions if, for example, a young person's a baker and starts work at 3 or 4 in the morning, that they have to get a dispensation if they have to drive to work. But it is something that is not meant to be punitive, but will hopefully address the issue whereby an awful lot of young people end up getting killed in the early hours of the morning. A lot of them are single drivers that happens to, no other cars involved, and it's clearly that they're driving at excessive speeds whenever those things do happen. We've also the issues of multiple deaths that are taking place, so whether young people should be carrying 3 or 4 other passengers of a similar peer group in their car. The adrenaline gets flowing, they're showing off how fast they can drive in front of their friends and how cool they are and how they can take corners and so forth, and then something awful happens. Those are all issues that we want to look at and see if we could enforce that situation and whether it would actually lead to a significant reduction in the number of accidents.
It's hard to legislate for some of these cases, though, isn't it? You might want to legislate to stop somebody whizzing around at high speed with a lot of their mates in the middle of the night, but then somebody falls foul of it who's taking their mother to hospital or whatever. How do you sort of legislate on such specific matters?
Well, I think it would be for peer groups that you'd be looking at. So if someone is in a car with this granny and mother with them, then you wouldn't be pursuing those particular individuals, and I think the legislation would be quite clear on that, and the guidelines would be quite clear on that. But where the young lad's out there in his Corsa and there's 4 other teenagers in that car, then that's potentially a case that would be looked at.
And what about speed limits? Always a controversial one, but talk of reducing the speed limits in certain areas.
In the urban areas, particularly in inner rings, we would be looking at, and it's a DRD issue, but we would be looking at reducing speed limits potentially to 20 miles an hour in some circumstances. And outside schools, as well as that, looking at some of the rural roads, and particularly where there is a high number of accidents taking place, about introducing speed cameras.
The average speed ones, which you see now in some roads.
Yeah, at those accident black spots, and where you're identifying that a rising number of accidents are taking place, perhaps putting cameras into those areas at an early point to reduce the number of potential accidents that might happen, and the avoidance of creating an accident black spot.
Okay, Edwin Poots, many thanks indeed.
Thank you.